Last week, there was some drama that came out of Supernova 2025. Almost like clockwork at this point, it feels like something happens every Supernova or SmashCon. This time around, it revolved around the sudden disappearance of aann from top 8 following their victory over Jazzo. Long and short of it is, aann DQ'd from top 8. Later on, they went on to make a post about the situation, and for those who don't actively follow Twitter stuff, I don't blame you. aann basically received yet another barrage of backlash and personal attacks, not unlike the negative publicity they got when they first won SmashCon in 2022. This video isn't about aann, but it was the inciting incident that sparked a lot of rediscussion on Steve as a character and the targeted harassment those who play Steve are prone to getting. By this point, the absurdity of Steve has been well documented not just on my channel, but across all Smash content mediums. I definitely recommend you check out Rexius's incredible analysis on Steve. You couldn't make a more extensive and exhaustive video on the character even if you tried. But what I want to do for today is go through some other factors beyond what Steve does, even though I will of course include that, and make a thought piece on the general hatred Steve and by extension those who play him get. We're now 4 years into the post-pandemic tournament metagame, and as if we haven't been beating a dead horse the entire time, people have been calling for action to be taken against Steve, namely in the form of banning him. So let's not waste any more time and get to it. Today I bring you why everyone hates Steve. It's commonplace for whatever is the highest performing character in a video game to also be the target of the community's ire at a commensurate rate. The more often a character wins, the more people experience the disappointment of losing against them, thereby fostering negative sentiment towards them. Not the first time this happened before. People hated Meta Knight and Bayonetta for being the best characters in the game in their respective titles, and for a good reason too, I might add. But the situation involving Steve is noticeably different, I would argue, because it was a perfect storm of circumstances that coalesced into the fandom-wide hatred people have for the character. More than that of not just other top tiers in this game like Min Min, Kazuya, and Aegis, but even throughout the entire Smash Bros. Franchise as a whole. What is the single biggest reason that will lead to people disliking a character in a video game? The answer: frustration. Frustration denotes the feeling of being upset or annoyed, especially because of the inability to change or achieve something. Those who follow any of my channels might recall I bring this definition up a lot because to me it's the ultimate end goal determining the success and failure of a video game. In my eyes, regardless of the genre, the experience, whether single or multiplayer, the primary objective when designing a video game is to minimize frustration because frustration is the antithesis of agency. Agency entails the capacity one has to influence or change the outcome of something. In the context of Smash, an example of having agency is this. Your opponent is trying to hit you with an attack. Blocking the attack, dodging the attack, or responding with an attack of your own can turn the opponent's aggressive action against them, leading to a favorable outcome for you. The ability to respond to whatever it is your opponent's doing is the principal essence of agency. Loss of agency leads to frustration, since per the definition of frustration, one does not have the ability to change or achieve something. As the multiplayer PvP title, Ultimate's essentially a battle of agency. Which player's ability to influence the outcome of a game wins over the other. Top performing characters in games are such because their agency has greater influence in the outcome than that of their peers, naturally resulting in players experiencing frustration towards them. Were that the case in Smash, the higher up a cast member is on the tier list, the more hate they should be experiencing, right? Empirically speaking, though, that's almost never the case. A number of mid and low tiers get hated on more than some top tiers. In that case, there would need to be some other contributing factor that governs people's dislike towards a character. And to better illustrate that, I want to go over to Melee for a moment. Despite being around for nearly a quarter century at this point and receiving no updates or patches ever since the game came out, Melee's tier list has been altered many times over the years, but even throughout that time, the character unanimously considered to be the best would unequivocally be Fox, and the results correspond to that, with many of the game's top players piloting the character. Despite having perennially been number 1 throughout most of Melee's tenure, from what I can observe, the vast majority of people don't really take issue with that, which is a stark contrast to how people feel about Steve, going so far as to call for him to be banned. What distinguishes the two to such an extent that even though they're both the number 1 character in their respective titles, there's such a difference in how players perceive them? It ties back to agency. When battling Fox, his incredible mobility, close quarters combat, and high damage output make him one of the most threatening characters to come across. Yet at the same time, operating the character at a top level necessitates extreme awareness of the fact that Fox can explode as easily as he can explode his opponent, forcing the Fox player to skirt a very fine line as a result of being a glass cannon. In light of that, though he's indisputably the best character in Melee, people don't mind going up against him because you as the opponent have total agency in the outcome of a matchup. Or in other words, assuming you're playing a quote-unquote viable character, you can easily overcome the inherent difference in strength by outplaying your opponent. Such is not the case for Steve in Ultimate, because when playing against him it's not just a contest of who wants to win more than the other person. There's one major distinction Steve carries that makes people disproportionately hate fighting him in Ultimate than Melee players do against Fox, and that would be the way in which he goes about achieving victory. Just like with the other 80-something characters in this game, Steve can very much win by simply trying to outplay the opponent, dodging and blocking their attacks, positioning to avoid getting hit, spacing moves, and whatnot, the same win condition everyone else has. But in addition to exerting his own agency against his opponent, possibly unique only to him is the ability to deprive agency from his opponent. In layman's terms, rather than trying to beat you by carrying a bigger stick, Steve beats you by taking away your stick, aka your ability to change or influence the outcome of the situation. This trait's exceedingly rare in Smash Ultimate. In fact, like I said, it may even only exist in Steve, underlining why people hate him more than any other character in the game. When looking at other members of the cast, an argument can be made that, for example, Samus with her long-range attacks can make you feel as if you have no agency, since all she needs to do is stand far away and throw stuff at you until you eventually die. But even for those who have a terrible matchup against her like Luigi, there is still something you can do, or should I say many things you can do. Samus, and by extension other zoners, can't just sit there and do their thing, since there's the ever-present threat of you taking action to stop them. Even the most campy characters in the game like Sonic or Pac-Man have to be mindful and respect the fact that their opponent can and will do everything in their agency to kill them. They might excel at avoiding it, but the point remains, just as you had to tailor your win condition around their penchant for avoiding you, they had to tailor their win condition around your desire to close the gap and strike. The one exception to this would be Steve. Steve is the only character in Smash Ultimate with the ability to continuously diminish or outright negate his opponent's win condition, preventing them from influencing the outcome of the match. By establishing a simple 3-high wall of blocks, for as long as that wall remains in place, Steve no longer has to consider his opponent's win condition, or at least a significant portion of it. No exceptions. Every single character in the roster functionally has no way to pose a threat against him, whether you're a close quarters brawler like Mario, a sword fighter like Shulk, a zoner like Duck Hunt, or anyone for that matter. You might say, but what if you can throw projectiles with a big enough hitbox to attack Steve through the wall? The overwhelming majority of attacks in this game do not have the area coverage or penetrating ability to hit Steve behind a wall. Subsequently, there are virtually no attacks of that variety that pose an immediate threat to Steve. This requires the opponent to first address the wall by either destroying it or waiting for it to break on its own. Until that happens, there is nothing they can do against Steve, and throughout the course of a fight he can continue building and rebuilding that wall over and over and over. One might argue the blade cuts both ways. Just as the opponent can't do anything to threaten Steve, Steve can't do anything to threaten his opponent either. On the surface, that is indeed true, it's a stalemate if you will. However, therein lies the second part of the matchup dynamic. Steve can most certainly threaten you, perhaps not immediately but later in the future. As I'm sure you're aware, Steve's tools and various attacks demand resources to be crafted and used. In exchange for that limitation, the bulk of his attacks carry noticeably higher damage output and frame data than compared to similar attacks. For example, Steve's back air is an arcing swing behind him, it's got a meaty hitbox and is one of his go-to kill options, reminiscent of back airs on other characters. However, his back air, particularly Diamond, is notoriously strong for how fast, safe, and covering it is, dealing well over 20% unstaled and killing most characters around the 80% mark at the ledge, if not earlier depending on reach. This applies to pretty much all of his moves. Because they all require materials of some kind, therefore being either limited in usage or not immediately accessible, Steve is compensated by those moves being faster, bigger, stronger, safer, more spammable, what have you. Theoretically, the measure of balance is that Steve has to fend you off while mining for mats at the same time, meaning if you're able to keep applying pressure on him and giving him little room to breathe, you can prevent him from accessing his most powerful attacks. Conversely, if Steve can get enough time to mine materials, he can turn the tide in the match around by beating you down with a bigger stick, or in this case a shinier one. If it were just that, Steve would be a pretty reasonable character all things considered. There have been countless games where the Steve player is constantly in disadvantage, unable to find the time to mine and losing access to several of their critical moves like Anvil and Minecart. A Steve without diamond tools and iron at his disposal is a far less dangerous character to deal with. When you put it that way, the interaction would be no different than trying to stop Hero from accessing menu, or stopping Mewtwo from charging a Shadow Ball, or Pac-Man from loading up a bonus fruit. So in that sense, might be a hot take, but I actually take no issue with Steve's moves being overpowered if you have the agency to stop him from getting them. In practice, the very fact that Steve is able to shut down your agency to stop him, if even for just a brief moment, fundamentally undermines that balancing dynamic. You can't stop him, or rather you can't stop him in a way that doesn't stack the deck in favor of him. You could say, why not just jump over the wall? Depending on what stage you're on, Steve's able to bottleneck all entry points to him to just a single one, usually above him, making it extremely easy for him to punish you for approaching since he can just focus all attention to that one opening. Clearly, the last thing you as the opponent want to do is to walk into an obvious trap, but short of breaking down walls that he can easily put back up or attack you for trying to do so, there's quite literally nothing the majority of the roster can do to advance the game state in their favor. In essence, they have no agency. During that time, Steve is sitting on the other side effectively spamming rare candies on himself, and then by the time he's actually willing to confront you with a lifetime supply of iron, gold for powered minecart, and fresh diamond tools on deck, even if you're playing someone who can beat him in a head-on confrontation like Min, you're essentially fighting a Charizard as a war total. You're still stuck in mid-evolution while Steve cheats his way to final evolution. Yes, you have the type advantage, but who cares when he's 20 levels ahead of you? You might have been able to take him on when he was still in wood tools and had only 2 or 3 rounds of regular minecart and or anvil, but full build Steve is like fighting Joker with perma Arsene or Cloud with infinite limit. That is what separates Ultimate Steve from Melee Fox. Heck, even bro Meta Knight and Smash 4 Bayo. Overpowered as they were, there was nothing standing between you and them, literally. Being top tiers, their agency is of course more influential than yours, but what mattered is that you always had agency of your own, no matter how little. When battling Steve though, not only is his agency better than yours, but he can also neutralize your agency at moments throughout a match. One of the most frequently used examples people use to underscore their hatred for Steve is the infamous Tweak vs Aquila set, where Tweak basically just stood there and let Aquila mine behind a wall. I'm sure by that point Tweak already gave up on the set, but even if he still wanted to win, what the hell could he realistically do that wasn't a 75-25 in favor of Aquila? You've seen this happen over and over again. Steve's mining behind a wall and the opponent's just standing there, but that's because there's legitimately nothing they can do in that situation. The only thing they can do to even remotely pressure Steve is by breaking down that wall or by taking an extreme risk to attack from above, both of which are extremely in the Steve player's favor. In any PvP game with a playable cast, inevitably some characters will be more efficient or practical than others, such as the nature of video games. The important thing is to both ensure that the gap between the strongest and weakest one is as narrow as possible, to which in Smash Ultimate's credit they've done the best job at that than any Smash title before it, but most integrally to ensure everyone has equal opportunity to exercise their agency in a match, no matter what the matchup is. Even in -2s like Donkey Kong vs Pikachu or Ganondorf vs Sonic, there should always be at least a chance for the disadvantaged player to make something happen, because you're both playing the same game, bound to the same rules and constraints that form the game's mechanics and systems. Yes, even Min, Kazuya, Aegis, and Sonic, for all their bullshit, you still have agency in the matchup. Steve is the only character in the game who circumvents those constraints. Even worse, he artificially forces more constraints on you, so much so that the best case scenario is the notion that eventually he'll come after you once he gets enough materials. That's right, fighting a character with moves twice as powerful as yours is the best case scenario. Imagine worst case. That to me is the keystone reason why everyone hates Steve. More than how overtuned his attacks are, the fact that he shuts down your ability to influence the match leads to people feeling frustrated when fighting him. The idea that you can do everything right and still lose is the single most demoralizing feeling you can have in a video game. I speak from experience. I played League for over 10 years. I think I speak for many of us when I say I would feel way less frustration getting JV 4-stocked by a player constantly outplaying and styling on me than losing to Steve. Because in the former case it was all skill, but for Steve, most of the time it feels like they just checkmated you through bad game design. That's also why so many people call Steve players carried. It doesn't feel deserved or earned. It's like winning the game because the opponent DC'd. Steve basically gets to disconnect the opponent. My hope is that in the next Smash title, the game's top tiers are top tiers because they're strong, and not because they can make the opponent functionally non-existent. Unfortunately though, for the remainder of Ultimate's tenure, we're just gonna have to deal with it. But what do you guys think about the community's hatred for Steve? Do you agree or disagree with my reasoning? Feel free to share in the comments down below. That's it for today, so if you enjoyed the video, a like and subscribe would be much appreciated. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter @Vars, join my Discord server, and check out my other Smash Ultimate discussions if you haven't yet. But till next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.
Iron in the pocket, diamond in the hand. Damn! Anvil comes down, C4 just narrowly misses. Okay. On and swinging, finds the swing, finds the good one, but that kill spark isn't gonna quite actually be true.
Oh, no! A crazy finish right there on Ann's behalf, and there you have it. Your CEO 2025 Smash